Now, we know they're not going to put that extra $3 billion in. Where does that extra $3 billion come from? Private. And I think for the last few years, even pre-COVID, private funding has exceeded NHS funding annually. The NHS treats more people, or has a contact with more people, but there's more spent on private dentistry annually than there is on the NHS. The NHS is the second biggest funder of dentistry. Private is number one.
I wasn't aware of that. It went from being, I'm going to do foundation training because I need to do it or want to do it and I want to learn the skills to become a good, competent general practitioner and go into dentistry, to something that, well, I don't really want to do this anyway.
Well,
I want to be an all-singing, all-dancing private cosmetic dentist because on Instagram I'm seeing smile makeovers, whitening, bonding, and this is what I'm going to be doing.
that is not the case with the current generation. All this other stuff, the quality of life stuff, is more important.
Hi guys, welcome to Dentistry Unmasked. In this episode, I will be interviewing Dr. Tony Kilcoyne. Tony needs no introduction, but he was my educational supervisor some 20 years ago, and he's been involved in foundation training for 3 decades now. He is the educational supervisor for the Dewsbury scheme in the Yorkshire Deanery, and he has been the advisor since its inception. So he's a very, very experienced, knowledgeable practitioner. He has been involved with the GDC, with the BDA as well, and these are previous posts, but he still continues to be involved in foundation training and influencing the education, postgraduate education behind the scenes. I recently had a great chat with him. We talked everything from his background, his history in dentistry, but very, very uniquely, how has the training for today's graduate changed? We had a very, very candid chat about how undergraduate training has changed over the last 2 decades and how this is affecting our graduates today. The knock-on effect for foundation training, and now then, the knock-on effect in practice. Now, recently, since this interview was recorded, Bupa has effectively collapsed and they've closed 80 dental practices which are seen as unworkable sites. We have an NHS contract which is not fit for purpose, and the recruitment crisis is real. We cannot find dentists to work in these clinics with these business models. So what is the future for dentistry as a whole, for NHS dentistry, for private dentistry indeed as well? So this is such a fabulous conversation that we had. It really, really does, get to the root cause of a lot of things. It really was an education for me because, we're all aware of the problems that exist, and it's very, very easy to blame the government and say they need to throw money at it. But there is a deeper problem. So have a listen. Let me know what you think. I always appreciate your comments and your likes and your shares as well. I must say that from the first couple of episodes that were released with Paul Tipton, I've been overwhelmed at the response, and it means that everything that I've dreamt of doing and everything that we do here is worthwhile. So I'm glad that you enjoy listening. So guys, I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Tony. Chat soon.
Thank you for coming in and agreeing to sit down and talk with us. It's a pleasure to have you here, and obviously you're an inspiration to me. You're an important person to me because you were my scheme advisor, believe it or not, 19 years ago.
I know, we need to stop counting years at a certain point in life, don't we? But yeah, and a lot's happened in 19 years.
A lot's happened in 19 years. So, it would be great to talk about, where you started, your experience over the last, 31 years now, as being involved in vocational training. And I'd love to talk to you today about how you feel the profession has changed and what you've seen, especially with regards to the vocational training aspect of things and how it's affecting our young dentists today. Would love to talk about that. But can we start with you? So how did you get into dentistry? Why did you become a dentist?
Oh, yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, a lot of us have had to make a decision at 18.
Mm-hmm.
And it's quite a worrying decision because some people will have always known that's what they wanted to do, but the majority of us kind of fell into dentistry, really. And I wasn't dissimilar. You You sit your A levels. You have to apply. I actually applied for medicine first.
Right.
And then I was visiting my dentist. My dentist, they were asking what you're going to do as a future career. And I said, I think I'll go into medicine. I've got the right A levels and, I think I could do it. And they said, have you ever thought of dentistry?
Mm-hmm.
And I was sat there and I suddenly thought, nobody's ever mentioned dentistry. And the first thing I did when I left the dentist half numb was go to the local library, look at what the requirements were, what the curriculum was. And of course, it wasn't dissimilar to what I was thinking about medicine, because I think in my head I was thinking more being a surgeon than, say, a GP. But, practical skills, working with people, the academic side, the biology and the science, everything just clicked with me. It was like, oh my goodness, that ticks all my boxes. I can't believe this is what dentistry does in 4 years and 1 term, as it was at the time.
Yeah.
But 5 years now. And I just thought, oh my goodness, I've applied for the wrong thing. I've applied for medicine.
So you'd already applied for medicine?
I'd set off my UCA forms and everything. So very naively, I thought, oh, well, they'll understand. And I rang up the universities and said, excuse me, I hope you don't mind, but I've accidentally applied for the wrong thing, medicine. Would you mind swapping over for dentistry? And I couldn't understand why the phone kept hanging up on me.
Right.
And I'm thinking, is in my naive mind, well, it's similar. Surely they all work together and they're very friendly. And of course, they're ultra competitive for a similar type of graduates. And it wasn't the done thing. But then a part of me thought, well, what's the harm in trying? So I rang around pretty much every university that does dentistry and said, look, I've made a huge error. I now realise I want to do dentistry. I've looked at the curriculum. Nobody mentioned it to me before. I know I'm going to do dentistry and I want to do it at your university. Can you please give me an interview? And this was, I don't know, say March, April, May, before the course started in September. Yeah. Bearing in mind, I hadn't put an UCA application in. 2 universities offered me an interview.
Right.
I think they were just curious about who is this crazy person of their own volition, just phoning from home at the university and saying, will you consider me? I've made a huge error. I acknowledge that, but I now know this is what I want to do.
Is it fair to say, was dentistry seen as a backup option to medicine in that era?
Oh, I mean, usually, because in the end, I did get in and I was living with some medics. And of course, you always get teased that you're a failed medic doing dentistry, And then I would tease them and go, well, have you looked into it? Because there's not a lot of overtime. We're not doing like midnight shifts and weekends, you know. And so we would always sort of tug at each other. I think there was probably a little bit of academic snobbery, perhaps, at the time. And in sports, how competitive medicine and dentistry are in rugby or anything else,
What was it then about dentistry that made you think as an 18-year-old, I need to do this for the rest of my life?
Well, yeah, the other option was to be an actuary, just because I quite liked figures. But when I looked into the detail, just something about, you're right, about dentistry excited me. And I think it was the working with people and being very scientific and being very practical.
Yeah.
And there's not many that put those 3 together and perhaps give you a degree of control. Because loads of people would say, you imagine at the time, other adults who are not into, because I've no family in dentistry, would say, oh, why do you want to be a dentist? They only saw the negative side of it. Ooh, why do you want to be a dentist? And
that's changed a lot now as well, hasn't it?
Oh, it has.
Because I'm sure you see on your scheme that many dentists now, young dentists coming through foundation training, probably come from a family of dentists. Am I right in assuming that? Or
I would say the proportion is higher.
Yeah.
And you might find that's true in medicine and some of the other professions. The proportion is higher. It's interesting, though. I suspect there's probably an equal number where they were advised not to go into dentistry, or they saw their parents come home, stressed, and yes, maybe have a nicer lifestyle, but there is a personal price sometimes to pay for that, and they would sort of see that. Certainly with my children, because they all thought, oh, we'll take the easy option. When they say work experience from school, see what job you'd like, all of mine go, oh, I'll come to your practice, Dad. And I go, if you come to my practice, I'm going to make you do stuff.
Yeah.
And I would get like models out and I'd do a crown prep. I'd make them, do fillings in cavities that I'd cut in models, and I'd get them to play with materials and all. And all of them actually did quite well. They saw the job as it was. Didn't set them on fire.
No.
Didn't set them on fire. And so I think maybe subconsciously or directly, I thought, no, I want you to pursue something that you'll be happy in. Because there'll be stresses in anything you do. But if you don't love what you do, it will eat you away. So you have to find what you like. And even for them at 18, how do you tell? You don't really.
No. And that's what's really interesting, that you knew that you really passionately wanted to do this at 18.
Yes.
Yeah. So what did your children end up doing? Are they gone into dentistry?
So all my 3 children are now adults.
Yeah.
At the moment, one is in Japan teaching English.
Amazing.
One is in America, and I think he'll stay there permanently. Yeah.
So
and
that's
my
really nice.
eldest son, Daniel,
Yeah.
his job is he does music production. So
Interesting.
they're all doing non-dental stuff, but they're
Amazing.
doing what they're passionate about. And,
Yeah.
But look how diverse it is. And I think that's the thing about today is there's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different things you can do. The trick is finding out what you like, because you will naturally get better at it because you want to, and you'll enjoy that process even though it might be hard.
Yeah. No, that's hats off to you. You sound like you're a great dad. And
you're a parent all the time, so you never stop worrying about them.
No, absolutely. I can relate to that. 100%.
But they have to have that freedom to find their own way, sometimes make their own mistakes and recover from it, because that's part of growing up, and we've all had to do that too.
No, absolutely. So when you qualified,
yes,
there was no foundation training.
No, I think it had just started somewhere. There might have been 4 voluntary schemes in the country.
Yeah.
Because what happened when I qualified was everyone applied for a house job.
Everyone.
Everyone.
Right.
Because that was seen as the best thing.
Okay.
The salary wasn't brilliant and all the rest, but you got a house job either because they wanted to keep you on because they felt you did need a bit more support. So that might be 1 out of the 6 jobs. The other 5, it's because, wow, they think really highly of you. So many people have applied. They're going to kind of cream off the best, if you like. And then you're going to get really good at oral surgery or restorative, or even at the time, ortho. I mean, we did ortho as undergrads.
Yeah.
We presented fixed ortho patients in finals, so we had a lot of clinical experience compared to now, and we can discuss that a bit later. But you come out of dental school and you think, okay, if I'm not doing the house job, I need to find a practice. And in effect, you did look for a practice that was kind of a bit like what vocational training at the time and foundation training now is trying to deliver, a supportive practice that will let you ease into it, not put you under too much pressure, but actually help you become self-sufficient in practice.
Did that exist?
It did.
Did
it did, and I found it. And it was in Bradford, so that was, my hometown. So I was extremely fortunate. It's one of those, I thought I knew what I was looking for. So with a bit of good luck and a bit of enough criteria to reject the ones that were just interested in someone going there, working hard, earning a lot of money, but not getting any work satisfaction. At least I could eliminate those when I went to visit them. But out of the other, say, 2 or 3 opportunities I had, it was a bit of potluck finding the right one. So, but they were very supportive, very helpful, very keen to get a new dentist in there, such that they were willing to spend that extra time just supportively, but without smothering. It's that balance, isn't it? It's always difficult. So I was extremely fortunate. I got a very good start in a general dental practice. And I think year 2, I was looking for somewhere to live. And I was driving around Haworth, beautiful little village, the steam trains run, the Brontes of Haworth. It's a bit of a touristy destination. It's in the base of the Pennines. It's still a Bradford postcode, but it's just right out on the fringes. But a lovely little village, not quite stuck in time, but, it still had some character. And I was looking around for somewhere to live. And I drove past this old hairdressers for a for sale sign on it. And I was laughing to myself because I'd just been on a course where they were saying, and the ideal place to have a dental practice is, on a main bus route, near a doctor's or a post office, reasonably easy to get to for a community, blah, blah, blah. And I was laughing to myself because as I drove past the hairdressers, I was thinking, oh, that meets all that criteria, but it's a hairdresser's. But I looked around, I didn't see anywhere suitable for a home. And I went back and I thought, I'll just see how many dentists are in Haworth. It's a nice place. There's probably 2, 3, 4. It's probably over dentisted because, it's great. And I looked up, 0.
Right.
No dentists. I'm thinking, that can't be right. So I went and checked the lists again. I phoned up Bradford Council and go, I'm not sure if I'm getting this right, but I'm not showing up any dentist in Haworth. Surely there's a dentist in Haworth. I'm like, well, there used to be one 20 years ago and he died. And there's not been one since. Everybody goes to Keighley,
Right.
which is the next big town. And it is a big town, 60, 70, 80,000 population. Of course, there's 2 or 3 practices. And now today there's 2 or 3 big corporates, but it's that. So it acted like a draw for all the villages in the area would go to Keighley for their, medical, dental, whatever. So I suddenly thought, oh my God, that would make a great practice. So I went and had a look and see what price they wanted. And it was pretty dilapidated inside. But I just thought, well, if you're doing a dental practice, you're probably going to gut it all anyway, and set it up for a dental practice. So I thought, I know, I'll apply for planning permission. So I went to Bradford Council and I said, and because it was already a business, it was more like a change of use than it was, changing a residential, and maybe there's a bit more hurdles. So I applied for that and I was so proud of myself, and I'd agreed a price with the people that if this comes through for a dental practice, I'll pay you full asking price and it will go through and everything will be great. And then you had those sleepless nights of, can I afford it? Am I doing the right thing? I've only been qualified 2 years. What am I thinking? But I recognized it was in the right place. And they say, don't they now, location, location, location. And it just ticked all. So it probably was too early for me, but everything else was right. But a big thing happened next. And this was my naivety, of course, just been qualified 2 years. I don't know if most people know, when you do planning permission, it goes public.
Right.
3 other dentists tried to gazump it.
Right, okay.
Because suddenly they thought, somebody's applying for planning permission.
Yeah.
It must have potential. And of course, if anyone looked at it, it would be like, it's on a main road, main bus route, next to a doctor's and a post office or whatever. Ticks all the boxes. Let's go in and offer more. So, of course, now the owners are ringing me up saying, we're getting all these extra offers above asking price. And, so obviously we're going to consider those.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, no, we had a deal. And we ended up in this Chinese auction thing where you're blindly trying to outbid people that you don't even know what their real bids are. You've just been told this. I'm like, I've opened up a hornet's nest here. And I don't know if there was a cleverer way to do it at the time, but I should have been prepared and I wasn't. And apparently these other dentists, they were turning up with their bank manager and walking them around. And the owners were saying, we heard the bank manager say, you can have that loan, no problem. And of course, I hadn't walked around with the bank manager or anything.
So how did you nail it then? Well,
I suppose I had to do, I won't say a bluff, but I just had to go in and say, right, look, this is the price I'm paying. It's 20% more than you were asking. You wouldn't have had this other interest had I not applied for planning permission. And morally and ethically and all, I just poured it on. This is the right thing to do. And then, of course, fortunately, they were pretty good people. They came back to me and said, okay, you're right. And you're not in a chain. You're not waiting for, I did have a bank loan, but it was all set up. But you've got to complete in 6 weeks. You've got to do this. You've got to do that. And if you're 6 weeks and 1 day, we're going with the alternative. I said, fine. And I walked out the door, having no idea if it could be done in 6 weeks or not.
Yeah.
But of course, I'm on the blower to solicitors and everything like, this has to be done or I lose it. And I think it was like just the week before it all got done.
Yeah.
But I was sweating all the time. And then, of course, you sat there thinking, great, I've overpaid for this. Obviously, 31 years looking back.
Yeah.
I wish I'd bought the whole flaming street of property, you know. Why was I worrying about 20% of a relatively low price 30 odd years ago? But at the time, it was everything I had and more. So to me, it was everything. And of course, then you're looking at it and thinking, okay, this place is falling down. What have I done?
Yeah. They're the best places, though.
They're the best places.
They're the best places.
So
That's what you
basically,
want to
we
buy.
stripped it out,
Yeah.
opened the doors, and this was in the days you couldn't advertise.
Mm-hmm.
The signs on the outside, the letters, I can't remember, they couldn't be more than 4 inches high.
So
your
specifically
nameplate.
for dental
Dentistry, yeah. The GDC would say it's unethical to advertise, it's this, it's that, it demeans the profession.
Mm-hmm.
The letters on your plate can only be certain height. In the yellow pages, you can only have a factual entry. You can't say you do tooth whitening or whatever it was at the time, or So, and we're opening up as a squat, basically. So I was working part-time in one practice as an associate and then gradually building it up. It's one of those, it's easy now to say, oh, I needn't have worried. But, you borrow all this money, you've rushed it through, you've overpaid, you've gutted the place. Now you're in mega debt.
Yeah.
And I think the first day we had 4 patients. And that was literally like doing, I won't say a leaflet drop round the village, but the good thing about a village is gossip spreads quick. So all you had to do was tell half a dozen people and zoom, and you have an open day, you invite people in, have a cup of tea, have a look around, have a chat. And gradually, it took about a year for it to become what I would say viable, where I was paying the bills. And that's the thing with the squat, isn't it? You don't know the time scale of, the break even. And then obviously you don't know its potential after that. So you are taking a risk. So other things have to be right for you to sit in there. And then I lived above. So I sacrificed the house.
So you found a place to live as well.
So I found a place to live.
Yeah.
And of course people go, oh God, you live above. People will be knocking on your door, middle of the weekend and all that. I found them very respectful, actually, of that, an occasional emergency, yes, but at the time you were glad of the business, so you didn't mind. So, so that was my journey with the practice there.
That's amazing. Just to digress, because I get asked this all the time, when are you ready to buy a dental practice? How do you know the conditions are right to buy a dental?
Sure.
How do you know it's going to work? And I think you've just explained it so beautifully there. I just don't think you know, do you? And there is no such thing as a right time to buy. There is no such thing as the ideal business to buy. You just don't know. And I think that's the thing about entrepreneurship, isn't it? That you've just got to just take that risk and just go for it. And you don't know how it's going to work out.
No, you control the things that you can.
Yeah.
But there's still a lot you are doing in good faith, really.
Yeah.
But if the most important things seem to be right, and you might call it a gut feeling, but if it's enough to overcome that fear, then it is probably the right thing for you.
Yeah.
It might not necessarily be the right thing for somebody else. So, yes, there comes a judgment call where you make that decision. You could say that about meeting your life partner.
Mm-hmm.
You could say that about, relocating. You could say that about choosing between 2 jobs. There's only so much preparation you can do. And then the rest you have to go by what feels right for me and then commit to it, really. But yeah, I think if you wait for everything to be perfect, you'll probably not end up doing many things.
Absolutely.
So you get things as good as you can. And then if you feel, yes, I can compensate for the other third, I've done the 2/3, the other third is going to take hard work, a little bit of luck. But again, sometimes the harder you work, the more luckier you get, and so on.
Absolutely. Law of attraction, if you've ever heard of that.
Yeah, in a way,
Yeah.
in many ways.
Guys, as you know, I am the lead tutor of the Hedro Academy Vertical Preparation course. Now, we have put together this beautiful vertical preparation kit, which has been beautifully made by Former Dental Supplies. Simon at Former has kindly agreed to give one lucky winner of this podcast a kit completely free of charge, which retails normally at £220 plus VAT. So all you have to do to win one of these fantastic vertical preparation kits is just give us a like, subscribe to the podcast and share it, and leave a comment below, and we will pick one lucky winner every podcast, and Burkit will be finding itself in your clinic. Okay, so yeah, great guys. The Horacle Burkit by Hedro Academy and Former Dental Supplies. You got involved in foundation training initially in what year was that?
Oh, well, that was 1991. But just before that,
Yeah.
So I started in this practice, and obviously I had some spare time because it wasn't full time.
Yeah.
And a job came up at Leeds Dental Institute
Right.
to be a clinical demonstrator. So now I'm thinking, oh my God, I've been qualified 2.5 years now, got my own practice. How on earth would they accept me to teach dentistry? I've only been qualified 2.5 years, but I thought I'll apply for it for the experience of having the interview, see what they're looking for. And then who knows, maybe in 4 or 5 years, I'll, think of applying properly when I'm established at the practice. So I went along for the interview, which was fairly informal. They walked me around the departments. And, they would just ask me things about what am I doing now? And I'd be like, oh, I've just bought a practice. And you could see them look like, okay, you've been qualified 2.5 years. What the hell? And why do you want to do the job? And it is true that I did kind of want to share and help my fellow students because I knew what it was like when I graduated. I really appreciated the help from the certain staff, we'd always go queue up for and so on. And so, yeah, it was just something I felt that I want to get into that. I guess to balance that academic side, there was a part of me that still wanted a little academic stimulation and challenge. And I remember one of the key questions they asked me was, do you still use rubber dam? I said, well, actually, I do. I'm quite a big fan of it now. Now I've got good at getting it on quick, and my nurses help me with it. I love it. And they said, well, when can you start? I'm like, well, I thought, I don't want to seem too keen, like tomorrow, So I said, no, it'll have to be a couple of weeks. I've got a lot to organise. I think myself, I could start next week, but I'll say a couple of weeks. Play hard to get a little bit. And they said, yeah, that'll be fine. So, so how about Tuesday afternoons or whatever? And I said, great. So along I went, and I turned up Tuesday afternoon and thought, oh no, I'm going to be exposed as this big fraud. What do I know? I've been qualified 2.5 years, and some student's going to say all these references to me, and I'm going to look like an idiot compared to the consultants, because at the time the consultants were on the clinic, you know. So of course you get that fear and that dread, that self-doubt, eats away at you sometimes. So I went in and I thought, well, I'll give it my best shots, and I met this consultant, and I won't say any names, but I said, look, I'm just a little bit concerned. I haven't done this before. Can I kind of shadow you a bit and learn the ropes? And he goes, sure, I'll show you how to do it. I've been doing this job, and of course, and he's got all these letters after his name. And I think, oh God, I'm in the presence of a dental god here. I'm really going to learn a lot. And I'll never forget this. The first student that asked for help was for a lining. Can you come check my lining?
Yeah.
In the days when they used to do thick linings. And he went over and he had a look. He looked at the cavity. He looked at me. He looked at the cavity. And he said in a loud voice, and I'll never forget this, it looks like a pigeon has shat in that. And walked off. And I'm stood there like, in my mind, my jaw's on the floor, but in my mind, I'm trying to look calm. I'm looking at the student who's just looked devastated, even though they had a mask on. You could just tell. And I'm looking at the patient whose eyes were like wide open, like Bambi, sort of saying, what does he mean? What does he mean? And I just said, can I just have a look? And I looked, and graphically, that was quite a good description. It was just kind of everywhere, up the side of the walls. Yeah. So I just said, yes, you've just been a bit extra generous, with it. If you just trim it off the side of the walls, the base is very good. It's just the walls, if you just trim it, you've just been a bit generous, really. And I walked away and I thought, what on earth was I worried about? Mm-hmm. What was I worried about? Just treat your fellow colleagues as decent human beings. It doesn't matter if they're students or consultants or whoever. I learned very quickly, dentistry is first and foremost a people skills activity.
Communication.
Absolutely.
100%. So you got involved in foundation training initially in 1991, is that correct?
Oh, yes.
So you told me when we were communicating before the podcast that it was voluntary. The role was voluntary.
Yeah, I know. It's incredible, isn't it?
So please tell me, how did that come about, and what was the motivation behind that? What was the motivation behind joining it? Was it an extension of your time as a Leeds Dental Institute demonstrator?
Pretty much. And again, a job came up. Mm-hmm. And I think it said something like you had to have a minimum of, 4 years experience in practice. And I was like, 4.5. It was one of those, oh my God, I'm sneaking over the line here. And of course, it went reasonably well, but I couldn't do the demonstrating and, in effect, now moved to postgraduate training for when the graduates come out. So when I did get appointed, I had to give up the undergraduate bit to do the postgraduate bit.
Okay.
But that was a kind of natural progression. And I think did help me tremendously understand where the graduates were coming from and what their challenges were leaving university to transition into a practice environment. And they worry terribly about this too, because it is a very different environment with different challenges. So, but it was voluntary at the time. And I think all the dental organisations and the dental schools and I'm trying to think what it was. It wasn't Health Education England. It was, anyway, there was a VT advisory board and they were like, look, we think this is a good transition. We can't make people do it, but we've got some funding to salary them for a year and give them support so they can learn at a pace. So at the end of the year, they're much better prepared for practice. Mm-hmm. And it was voluntary. And I think a lot of graduates when they graduated, they thought, well, that looks quite attractive. They kind of had insight to know that's what I need.
Yeah.
And although you could have gone straight into practice, again, unless you found the right supportive practice, it could be a disaster.
Well,
so a lot chose to. And when it got to 75% of graduates were choosing to do foundation training, what they tried to do then was say, well, look, we want funding for 100%, but the only way we can do that is if to get an NHS performer number, you have to do this, then the NHS has to allocate the funding to have enough places for everyone who graduates who chooses to do it. And so that's how it transitioned from voluntary to becoming compulsory if you want an NHS number. You could do private dentistry without it, but obviously that's not usually advised unless you're going abroad or whatever.
Could you just paint the picture before then a VT became a thing?
Yes.
What was the typical practice like? You qualified because private dentistry wasn't as mainstream as it is now.
Oh no,
I'm presuming. So it was pretty much you would go into an NHS practice. The stories of, it was the same when I first graduated as well. We're going back to 2004. It was typical to see 30 to 40 patients a day. Was that the landscape when you qualified?
Frightening.
So, yes.
It's frightening looking back
I
now.
know, and I don't know how I used to do it. But, it used to be a case of you would go from seeing maybe 4 or 6 patients a day in hospital, and that's pushing it as a fifth year or 4.5 years.
It is pushing it because today they're looking to see 2 or 3.
2 or 3.
Or they're nursing for the other dentist in the the dental student in the afternoon.
Yeah, and then to suddenly just go into 40 patients a day. So surely there must have been some mistakes, and surely there must have been a need for this, and this is why it came about, right?
Yes, I think a lot of practices probably thought they were being gentle on you, just throwing you into 20 patients a day, and that was literally a baptism of fire for people. It stressed them out, it burned them out, and unless they managed it very carefully, they would either just cut the time by cutting the good things in dentistry, which any fool can do something quicker by not doing everything they should.
Cutting corners.
Or you end up stressing and damaging your own health and well-being, and you go home very stressed. And certainly at the time, like alcoholism and depression and all these things were very prevalent.
Right.
In dentistry, it was frightening because I think dentists, vets, and pharmacists, they were always at the top of the suicide list or the, mental health problems list, and certainly mega stress list. And yes, something had to give, and it was either the quality of the patient care, your mental well-being, or just not enjoying the job and, taking it out on others taking it out on you. And you could see how that could quickly deteriorate. So there was definitely seen it as a need.
Yeah.
So overall, I think it was a good thing that, it became compulsory in the sense of the funding is assured if you meet the criteria to join the scheme. And frankly, the feedback was, yes, this is great. Interestingly, those that joined the scheme still found it hard work because it was still a jump from graduation. But compared to just going straight into practice, I think we were losing, and we would have probably lost a lot of the profession, either as a medical casualty or just as I'm leaving to pursue another career because they can tell that it's burning them out. So we were fortunate in the sense of along came foundation training. That still made it difficult when you left foundation training because that environment still existed, and it was a case of how do you cope with that?
I would say that foundation training for me really, really actually did prepare me well for general practice because the whole scheme was geared towards NHS dentistry, record keeping. It was in line with what was the FGDP key skills at the time, record keeping, radiography, a tiny bit of clinical photography, but it was all about preparing you for general practice.
Yes.
I felt that changed a little bit. I noticed a bit of a shift, and this is just my observation, so tell me if this is a distorted observation. But I was a trainer myself because I was very inspired by yourself and your colleagues, and as well the need to give back to the profession. There
is something amazingly satisfying about that, isn't it? Helping another colleague.
100%. And, so I was a foundation trainer. I'm sorry, I use these terms really loosely because it was a VT
all right.
trainer.
Yeah, just
but
say
we
it
all
at the
know,
time.
hopefully, what we're talking about. But I was a trainer for a decade.
Yeah.
I kind of noticed a shift in attitudes, though, around the 2015, 2016 mark, which is why I really wanted to call you in today to talk about this, where it went from being, I'm going to do foundation training because I need to do it or want to do it and I want to learn the skills to become a good, competent general practitioner and go into dentistry, to something that, well, I don't really want to do this anyway. I'm not going to be, working in dentistry for too long, and especially not on the NHS. I want to be an all singing, all dancing private cosmetic dentist because on Instagram I'm seeing smile makeovers, whitening, bonding, and this is what I'm going to be doing. And all this other stuff is beneath me, kind of thing. Maybe that's been a bit harsh, but I just noticed it became more and more and more difficult. I wouldn't say to train these people, but I just noticed a shift in attitude.
Okay.
So I don't know if you've noticed that. I don't know if that's something that you relate to at all.
Well, there's a few things going on here.
Go on.
So firstly, the way, shall we say, my younger colleagues communicate now
Mm-hmm.
is nearly all social media.
Right, yeah.
Nearly all. And if you try and get these young people to attend an LDC meeting or a postgraduate course or whatever, there's going to have to be a really special reason for them to go. Because, hey, they can just go on YouTube, they can ask Google or ChatGPT now or whatever. And they're used to doing what I call a collaborative approach to their progress now. And traditional stuff like courses, meeting with their colleagues, making definitive career plans. For us, shall we say, more mature dentists, work tends to be a big centre of our lives. Very much so. And then we try and squeeze family time and other things in and, relaxing or socialising. That is not the case with the current generation. Work is a thing they do alongside life.
Right.
It's not quite an add-on like the appendix is in your GI tract, but it's certainly no more equal than what's going on. So in their mind, it's I do my 9 to 5, I do this, it's just a job. All this other stuff, the quality of life stuff, is more important. And I guess there's a part of me that thinks, well, that slightly annoys me because we always put up with extra hours and extra hardship on driving the profession to be successful at work. And now you seem to be demoting that. But at the same time, our quality of life balance probably wasn't good. And there needs to be a meeting in between. So I suspect generationally, you're picking this up. Now, the trouble with social media is, as you know, very few people post, hey, this is my big cock up today.
Yeah.
This is what didn't go well last week. This is a complaint I had. Although actually people do anonymously post, how do I handle this? It's difficult. And they value that input, even though it might be on Facebook, which is not always the most authoritative source. But they value that probably more than they would, I don't know, looking at textbooks or even speaking to their indemnity provider. It's interesting, isn't it? There's that shift.
Going back to my original question, though, about my personal vision, my personal view of how I saw that shift, specifically little things like, on the foundation training scheme, they started to introduce stuff like photography, stuff like composite onlays, ceramic onlays. And then I was having foundation dentists come back to my NHS practice. I mean, I've sold that practice now, but at the time it was an NHS practice. And they're wanting to do this advanced dentistry on NHS patients.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
You see? So listening to what you're saying now, you're preparing dentists now to work in mixed practice. Is that correct?
I think so. Obviously, it's an NHS-funded scheme.
Yeah.
The core of it is NHS. And, of course, that's where you're going to get your most basic dental training, be it perio, caries, just the overall preventive care, And, frankly, if you look at what a foundation dentist does, certainly in Yorkshire, I would still say let's say 70 to 90% is still focused at NHS.
Yeah.
But there's some things the NHS doesn't do
Yeah.
that would be beneficial to the patient. And that could be tooth whitening or whatever. It could be that some things have a bit more of a cosmetic component. That is still very good for the patient, but it's just not allowed on the NHS.
Sure.
And then there are some patients who are choosing, shall we say, more expensive laboratory work or something more advanced. And that has to be done privately. And one of the favourite pieces of paperwork is the FP17DC on the NHS. I mean, we all don't like paperwork, but it's actually one of the better designed things, because even if you do a paper copy, it's NCR'd, so whatever you write on the top gets copied underneath. It has a basic outline and treatment plan. It has an option for private alternatives, and you sign it at the bottom and give it to the patient. So you're kind of covering certainly the first part of the consent process. You're certainly being very upfront with costs. You're certainly being very upfront with offering some private options. And there is an argument, if you don't offer private options, have you got full consent? Because you haven't actually described all the things that's possible. I mean, even for a missing tooth, an implant's possible. You might not be doing it in primary dental care on the NHS, but it's possible, and the patient should know. So if you follow the FP17DC, the NHS already makes private provision. And it does that in foundation training, because you have to be prepared for primary dental care. I think the other thing is, I think politically sometimes people get stuck on this, oh, but if it's an NHS scheme, shouldn't it be 100% NHS and all the rest? What you have to remember, I think, with dentistry is just zoom out a bit, is every single private patient or every single private item of treatment that's done is taking a burden off the NHS system. Because it's already overloaded, it's already under budgeted, it can't cope with the existing demand. If every private patient today had to go back into the NHS system, where's the money to pay for that? It isn't there, it'd be existing resources. So suddenly, all these people would struggle with access. Well, they wouldn't have it. And this is part of the reason why people are moving private, because they'd rather pay for something they want more on their terms. Now, in foundation training, to not prepare a young dentist for that discussion and to give full patient choice would actually be lacking in some of the GDC standards when it comes to consent and doing patient-centered care and acting, as it quite clearly states throughout all its documents, patient's best interest. Patient's best interest isn't necessarily restricting choice or not mentioning something or referral or whatever. So this is actually part of patient-centered care. Your point about do the younger generation have a slightly different focus, and maybe because of social media and because they see more glamorous dentistry being done, they want a piece of that because it's sexy and it's cool. And when they go back to their parents or their friends and go, yeah, I'm on an implants course, I'm learning implants. Whereas if it's, oh, well, actually, I'm going back to learning how to make dentures fit because I was never really very good at that, and it's really challenging. It don't sound quite as sexy, does it?
It doesn't. And I get
but it might be more useful.
Yeah, I get that. No, I 100% get that. I think the reason why I'm doing this in the first place and talking to wise people like yourself is because I can just see almost like a layer. Yes, there's that sexy layer, but then there's this level of dissatisfaction, this level of anxiety under the surface. And you've just touched on that, you know, a few moments ago, that we're looking at guys and girls who are 45 to 90,000 pounds in debt by the time they qualify. But then at the same time, and I don't know where this comes from, so I just want to discuss this with you. My generation, maybe your generation, earlier generations, whatever, there was that need, and I think you've addressed that actually, work is not central to their lives anymore. But if there was that level of debt, there was that need to get the job done and pay back that loan as quickly as we can. These guys, now, I really feel for them. They've got super debts, okay? But then they're looking for jobs where they are if it's an NHS job as their first job, because I mean, I've had first-hand experience of this, because this is one of the reasons why I sold my practice. Actually, it was getting so difficult to recruit anybody
Sure.
who would want to take on a full-time job at 6,000, 6,500 UDAs. That was way too much. They were looking for 5 days a week, 3,000 UDAs. As a business owner at the time, how could I make that work? How could I accommodate a full-time associate who wanted to do 3,000 UDAs? So
there's an element of slight naivety as well, because you've got to bear in mind they come out of dental school with almost zero business skills.
Yeah.
And in fact, almost zero financial knowledge, unless they've got that from other family members somehow, or there's the odd dental student that has run their own business, but generally they have no idea, even about pay as you earn and taxes and things. So what we've started doing in foundation training in our schemes now in Yorkshire is we have financial modules.
Right. Okay.
And we have 3 through the year, and we try and make them appropriate at the time. So if you imagine the first one is just like PAYE and how the tax system works and so on and so forth, just so they can understand it. The second one, there's the NHS pension scheme that nobody understands, but we simplify it. And we have an accountant who's with us doing this.
Yeah.
And then the third one is becoming an associate, becoming self-employed, all of those kind of things, saving for tax, and how you sort of plan your finances in a very different way when you're self-employed compared to being employed. Because we found that these were just the key skills and the key worries that were missing. So we've put that in, and that's part of what we call the management and leadership domain. Because in foundation dentistry, we cover 4 areas. Clinical's the obvious one.
Yeah.
But also professionalism, also management and leadership, and of course, communication skills and so on. So your observation with the UDAs is very interesting, because I did a survey of foundation dentists last year.
Yeah.
And said, okay, what's your ideal job looking like? And first of all, they want a 4-day week, not a 5-day week. So whether that's traditionally what were the Fridays, although the days get mixed up during the week now for education, but they actually value that, and they want to use that 5th day for their own self-development or recuperation or whatever it is. So they're trying to get that balance back that way. They certainly don't want to do 7,000 UDAs. They want to do half that.
Yeah.
3,500. So that 3,000 to 4,000 sort of range. And yes, they want to do some private as well. So when I did the maths, and at the time that was, I think, £11 a UDA or whatever, I was kind of showing them that actually it's a bit like staying where they are on foundation training at that salary, but without the same support, or it's not salaried and guaranteed. This is a self-employed status now. And it was a bit of a shocker for them when I fed that back. This is the reality here of what one needs to do. But you're right, they are not of the mindset of doing 7,000 UDAs, not the way it's set up now, and not because they're coming in at the bottom end of practice and perhaps getting the more new patients or high needs patients, or the ones that have been languishing on 111 waiting lists for 5 years. They might also be the most unreliable and so on. Whereas a practice that has a good mix based, that has been treating similar patients for a while, if they have a proportion of those and then see new patients as well, then it can balance. But what we probably have to do is almost think in terms in our heads that we're almost offering foundation year 2 and foundation year 3 in practice, and then becoming what we used to think of as a traditional associate. And I think they need that transition too.
Yeah, and it's getting, the transition to becoming that general practitioner, whatever you want to call it, it's getting longer. And that's another thing I recall from being a trainer a few years back, is the other thing I was observing, and it's not just through the VT schemes, it's from undergraduate level as well. They're being trained less and less clinically. Is that a correct observation?
This is a really hot political topic.
Okay,
amongst
we're not
the
going
dental
politics.
schools.
Yeah.
Well, we won't do the political bit. But definitely, dental education has changed massively, and where the emphasis is put has changed massively. And certainly in the past, when you look at, say, the volume of dentistry done at undergraduate level, there's a trend that it was higher experience the more years you go back. Now, the dental schools will argue with this because it depends how you count things. So if you count a root canal treatment as in the emergency clinic, you file the canal, and then in a normal clinic, you filled the canal in someone else, that will count as a root treatment, even though it wasn't the same person or even the same tooth. So it's got a lot more fragmented. And what the dental educationalists will argue is, well, we're measuring competence. So if you break down a root canal treatment to, clean, shape, fill, restore, whether it's the same patient and same tooth, or whether they're done at separate events, different people at different times, they all add up to the same thing. So as long as we get them there, that's all that matters. But actually, it's not really the same thing. It's a substitute for the same thing. It's a bit like saying, can you imagine if you did the impressions for a full denture on one patient, and a bite on another patient, and a try on, and suddenly it's like, oh, hang on, all those challenges, and they're not the same as following it through and having a successful outcome. And I have some sympathy with the dental schools because they had to double student numbers, didn't have a lot of choice. The dental schools weren't built for double the numbers. They certainly didn't get to double the staff or the nurses that support them.
Why did they have to double the numbers?
Because there became a workforce crisis. Can you believe, like in the 90s, they closed several dental schools?
Yes, okay.
Because they said, hey, prevention's going to work. We're not going to need many dentists in the future. At the moment, we can't get enough. Can't even have access. There's millions who haven't even seen a dentist, So that was totally misplaced because they thought, well, fluoride's going to fix caries, and perio, well, people are just going to clean the gums better. And what do we need GDPs for?
You know what? That does ring a bell. I remember when I was an undergraduate, and I remember a demonstrator saying to me, I feel sorry for you guys because you're not going to have any dentistry to do. And I was like, what do you mean? And he was like, well, people are keeping their teeth longer and brushing their teeth better, so there's not going to be any caries for you guys to treat. And we were all really disappointed. And look where we are now, eh?
Yes.
People will always need a dentist.
And even now, you're right. You're absolutely right. They'll always need us. Just what we might be providing and what the patient focused needs are will shift.
Hi guys, are you thinking about getting into dental implantology? Well, if you didn't know, I'm one of the founding members of Unique Implant Training. Unique Implant Training is now in its 5th year, and we are now fully EduQual accredited to diploma level, which is an 18-month diploma, the only 18-month implant diploma currently in the UK. So if you want to begin your implant journey, please don't hesitate to give us a call. Find us at www.uniqueimplantraining.co.uk. We look forward to seeing you soon. Can I close? When I say close, we're probably going to be talking about this for a good few minutes. But can we kind of get some sort of a roadmap to joining everything up? And I know we're not going to fix the world in one day. However, we've just talked about, and my main concern was observing how we have such dissatisfaction amongst particularly our younger dentists in the dental profession. But obviously, I talk to more experienced dentists and they've got a level of dissatisfaction as well. But we've touched on the fact that undergraduate training is not the same as it used to be because we've increased the number of people being trained, but the staff hasn't followed suit. A lot of that training has now moved on to foundation training, where a lot of these people are doing procedures lots of dentists are doing procedures more or less for the first time in their training practices, and then they want to qualify and I should say finish foundation training, want jobs where they're not doing so many UDAs as we maybe did 20 years ago. And I suppose that comes down to, is the NHS fit for purpose? Because, we do a letter every year, don't we? You draft it and we all sign it. Sir, the system is just not fit for purpose, So how do we fix this? How do we make everything marry up? How do we make our undergraduates better prepared? How do we utilize foundation training to make them better prepared for a real world job, should we say? And, is the NHS going to change anytime soon to make the environment for dentists a better environment to work in and provide the solutions that the patients need and deserve? That's a hell of a long question, I know, but what do you think?
In one sentence? Or?
No, let's talk about it.
Yeah. And you are kind of right in the sense of what do we need to do? What are the barriers? And the thing is, when you look, you've just mentioned a number of things from being an undergraduate right through to working in systems that are not fit for purpose.
Yeah.
And you're right. Every part has a deficiency, and they compound. They compound to make people feel dissatisfied as a profession because they're frustrated. It's not easy to identify, say, one big thing that they could make a plan to address.
Yeah.
Because it's numerous things that are compounding together to frustrate us from reaching our full potential as a profession and as professionals. So I think undergraduate has to look at itself, and there are challenges, has to look at itself to say, what kind of graduate is it preparing? What's it preparing this graduate for? It needs a relook. And of course, do we expect the graduate to be fully clinically competent in all the different areas on graduation? And the reality check, I would agree with you, is I doubt they are. I doubt they are. Now, I can't produce exact data for every student, but we know, as in foundation training, as the consumer of new graduates, that you're right. We're now spending what used to be the first month, then the first 3 months, now the first 6 months, getting them even clinically competent at removing caries. Now, when we do feedbacks from foundation dentists, the number of times of I'm now confident that I'm removing the right amount of caries in the right way to have a sustainable restoration. It's, on the one hand, it's kind of slightly frightening. On the other hand, when you look at their actual clinical experience of doing this, and the fact that it's not easy to know when there's caries near a pulp, at what point do you stop? Ask 3 dentists, you'll get 4 opinions. From experience,
absolutely.
So some things aren't easy. It sounds easy, but it isn't. Get the ADJ clean, yes, of course. But near the pulp, how far dare you go? And what some people leave as caries is mush. And no, that's too mushy.
Yeah.
And then it's others are like, I like to drill it till nothing comes away. Well, is that harder than it needs to be? And obviously the truth is somewhere in between. But they're not easy things to do. But I think there's certain things we should expect of a dental graduate to be not just competent, but the word is proficient to do, so that caries removal repeatedly in different situations consistently well, that will take certain numbers of experiences to demonstrate. And I feel if they were coming into foundation training at that level, and we know that in a kind of more honest and open and transparent way, then we can develop those skills. Whereas we now spend the first month of foundation training finding out where the gaps are in their training, finding out where they're not confident or proficient or even competent. Because they might have been competent doing a root canal in 4th year, but they haven't done it for a year. And then suddenly they have an access on a tooth that's a different one to what they've done. So all these things, we have to actually know what we're getting. And we have to help, realistically, the undergraduate dental schools deliver that despite being a bit short-staffed. I'll tell you a quick story, if I may. I remember once, and I won't mention any dental schools or anything, seeing a report where they were comparing the clinical experience of one dental school undergraduates with another. And basically, dental school B was providing something like 20% more actual clinical experiences pretty much across the board for their dental students. You and I would think, well done, dental school B. Can you help dental school A in sharing how you've done that so that dental school A can give 20% more clinical experiences in those 5 years? What actually happened was, allegedly, the Department of Health went to dental school B and says, we're going to cut your funding by 20%. because dental school A produces a BDS that's registrable with the GDC with 20% less clinical activity. And clinical activity is one of the most expensive bits of training to provide compared to lectures or online stuff. So clearly you don't need that 20% funding. So we're going to cut your funding and you'll still be able to get a degree from your students because dental school A is doing that with 20% less clinical experience. Do you see how that mentality is totally the wrong way around?
Yeah.
Totally
100%.
the wrong way around. But that's civil servants and people in power who control these systems. And poor dental school B, what choice does it have if they cut the funding or have the threat of cutting the funding? So I have a certain degree of sympathy with dental schools because they're under this perverse pressure sometimes. And they don't have the staffing or the funding to do what they know needs to be done. But it's one of them, they can't quite dare admit it because I wouldn't say it's a pride thing, but it's almost like then they're admitting they're not doing their job 100%. And whilst that might be true, it's because they can't. It's not because they don't want to. And so we need that level of honesty. Foundation training needs to be 2 years. Simple as that. You're going to have to transition and salary people into 2 years to make them competent and proficient in good, wholesome, basic general practice dentistry so they can work independently and earn a living. And yes, that means getting a bit more oral surgery experience. That means getting a bit more restorative experience. That means starting to treatment plan more effectively and efficiently. But they need 2 years because we're spending the first 6 months playing catch up, especially after COVID, what they didn't get undergraduate level. It was interesting, Scotland, was it the year before last? They actually stopped graduation for a year and foundation training for a year because they didn't feel their graduates got enough training and experience
Did they really? Wow.
because of COVID. So they just paused everything for a year. Now, of course, some of the graduates were a bit annoyed because it's like, great, so I'm not graduating for another year. But actually, at least when they did graduate, they did have that sort of extra years of experience to take into foundation training. But they funded that, you see. Whereas England said, no, we're just going to try and make the best of it. So there's that.
Yeah.
And then and what career are they walking into in general practice? And again, I think we have to think about this mixed economy style. Unless they're going to suddenly double or treble the funding of NHS dentistry in England. And I can't see them doing it politically. But actually, it doesn't cost that much. They only spend, I say only, 3 billion. That's including patients' charges. You could double that to 6 billion easily. And in terms of the bigger picture of they waste more than that every year. How much of all this PPE scandal and everything, hundreds of billions, millions they've wasted, billions they've wasted. 3 billion, and you could have, imagine another 3 billion, so that's 6 billion a year. You could have free dental care for everyone. I mean, it just blows your mind. And not only that, that funds every practice, every dentist, every dental laboratory. They could start teaching and training more dental technicians again because that side is dying. Who's going to want to train to be a dental technician for very low wage, pushing out NHS work?
Yeah.
So all of this is, all these negatives and deficiencies are adding up and they need to be turned into a positive. Now, we know they're not going to put that extra 3 billion in. Where does that extra 3 billion come from? Private. And I think for the last few years, even pre-COVID, private funding has exceeded NHS funding annually. The NHS treats more people or has a contact with more people, but there's more spent on private dentistry annually than there is on the NHS. The NHS is the second biggest funder of dentistry. Private is number one.
I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of that.
And it's growing. And it's growing.
Well, I can see that it's growing, definitely.
NHS funding isn't growing.
No.
All right, 1 or 2%. And I'm not even sure they've paid the last back date from last April yet. So can you imagine? But the private dentistry is growing. And that's the only way practices can grow. They either rob contracts off other dentists, the NHS. So that's robbing Peter to pay Paul, diminishing returns. It's never going to get any better. Or you grow through private patient care, private patient-centered care, and marketing that to find out what patients want and delivering it ethically in a way people like, in a quick way, and people will value that.
Yeah.
We just have to be better at communicating it.
I just feel that, we've touched on undergraduate level, they increased the places because there was a recruitment crisis. Now we've got a crisis of recruitment still. We're training the dentists, but they're not wanting to go into the jobs, So we've got a recruitment crisis in that respect.
So what you are getting now is more part-timers.
Yeah.
You see. And it's interesting, Rishi Sunak was answering some question in Parliament about difficulty with NHS dentistry access.
Yeah.
And we all know that's so true
Yeah.
to an extreme level. And of course, his stock answer was, well, we have more NHS dentists than we've ever had before. And yes, if you count heads, but not if you count whole-time equivalent.
Mm-hmm.
And so I always find political answers to questions interesting, because if they mention numbers, you need to look at percentages, because that's what they're not mentioning.
Mm-hmm.
And if they mention percentages, you need to look at actual numbers.
Mm-hmm.
They're always hiding something. So their answer isn't a lie, but it can be relatively misleading by distracting you from the whole statistical truth of what's actually going on. So there's more heads registered for NHS performer numbers, but there's more of them as a percentage doing part-time work.
Yeah. So
because the number of UDAs hasn't changed. You see, that's the lie, isn't it?
Absolutely.
How can access improve? The number of UDAs hasn't changed.
Do you see a change on the horizon? Do you see a change in the foreseeable future? Do you see any improvement?
Yes, because what's actually happening is government isn't, unfortunately, going to improve dentistry for us. They're quite happy for it to wither on the vine and just to slowly deteriorate. As long as they can manage the complaints and give the politically straight answers, that's fine. What I like about our Telegraph letters every year is that, and the reason it goes in the Telegraph, because it's not the most widely read paper, is that all the politicians read it from both sides, the opposition as well as those in power. All their civil servants read it, all their advisors read it, the media read it, and you will always find then there's more stories following that come up because they read this and they go, oh. And the reason we get multiple people to sign it is, because that's kind of gone out of fashion a little bit, is to show that it's not just my opinion or your opinion or an isolated person's opinion. Lots and lots and lots of people think this, enough to put their name on it. And many more think it, who for whatever reason are slightly frightened to put their name on it because maybe they've got an NHS contract and they don't want any grief from NHS management. And they imagine, whether it's true or not, but they imagine they would somehow get disadvantaged or punished for it. So they think it, they agree with it, but they sometimes daren't write their name on it. And it is an imaginary thing. But of course, they see other NHS people get admonished when they speak out and all the rest. And also, it's hard this time, isn't it? You've got ambulance workers striking, teachers striking, nurses striking. Would dentists ever strike? I don't think we're collective enough to do it. And even if we did, would it work? What would it change? So the way we're striking, in many ways, as a profession, is just going more private.
Leaving. Well, or leaving totally, I mean.
Or leaving totally.
Yeah.
We're not threatening to strike, or we're just doing it quietly. And that is why there's less access. That's why it's bad for the public to do that, to have such a bad system that people would rather leave it than stay in it, because it's not good for them or for patients. I mean, that's what a terrible, terrible indictment that is on those centrally who are responsible for delivering that system.
My perception is, what's happened to the poor kids today? They're going through dental school. They're not being trained adequately. Then they come out, and it's kind of like the dental school is then passing the problem onto foundation training. And then foundation training practices, because I was one of them, I kind of left to pick up that piece and start training these guys for the first time on procedures such as root canals, dentures, that sort of stuff. And as a business owner, you want to be able to just let them get on with it, but you're actually training them properly for the first time. That's affecting your business, because patients are coming expecting a level of care, and actually they're coming into a training environment, which I know that we all sign up for as foundation trainers, but that did become more and more and more of the case as the years went by for me, which is no bad thing, don't get me wrong, and I'm in touch with all my previous foundation dentists and we're all great friends, but I just saw that change, and that's one of the reasons why I exited it as well, because it was difficult to juggle everything.
No, I agree, and I think a lot of trainers, See, it's interesting. There's a difference between training and teaching.
Mm-hmm.
So certainly for foundation training, we were looking at having, even if it was low skills in something, but building those up. What we're now finding is you're having to teach the skills from scratch.
Absolutely. And that was the
And
change.
that,
Yeah.
and who's teaching you to do that?
Yeah.
That is a separate skill. That's why we ask undergraduate schools to do it, because it's not an easy thing to do. From going from nothing to something better, to competent. That is actually very time consuming, quite intense. There needs to be more safety and supervision and planning for that. And that is not what foundation trainers signed up for.
No.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
It's to take somebody who was kind of had some experience, but was an early young dentist with some skills that just needed growing, developing, and experiencing more of. And you would come in for the occasional problem, or you discuss a difficult case beforehand and maybe do it together. Every case now needs an element of teaching, followed by assessment, followed by training. And in fact, in foundation training now, we actually don't let them touch a patient for the first 2 weeks. They have to do some phantom head work and demonstrate they can do
really well.
class 2 cavities.
And that's for every single
in
foundation
Yorkshire,
dentist.
that's what we've done
Right.
as our way of managing the risk.
Okay.
Now, the GDC has asked us to manage the risk,
Yeah.
but hasn't sort of prescribed how to do it. So the way we've managed it is phantom head work first before touching any patients.
Wow. Okay.
But you see, technology's advanced, so now we have 3D printed teeth
Yeah.
with 3D caries in, so it's softer. So, okay, the plastic teeth, a bit more dense, like dentine and enamel, but it's never a real tooth. But what we can do is we have this standardized tooth with standardized caries and a radiograph showing it. So they have all that, and then they do that on the phantom head and have it assessed. Then we can tell if they're overextending, not removing enough caries, how the margins are, reproducibly between all the different FDs.
Yeah.
Give them feedback on that, get it so they're doing that good, and then they can treat a patient.
Yeah, very clever. So I think the real disadvantage really then lies with business owners with NHS contracts, really. Because my initial kind of angle from this is we've got young dentists, they're not very well prepared, they're very stressed, and I think we've kind of covered a lot of bases today to actually understand that and see that. And I think the system that they need to go into, I think the answer is what you're doing is tremendous. You're training them then for mixed practice, which is what they need to be trained for, and that's correct, isn't it?
Well, we're training them for patient-centered care and to do good dentistry.
Yeah.
Now, I sometimes get asked, yeah, but private or NHS or this or that. We're training them to be patient-centered dentists doing good dentistry.
Mm-hmm.
The systems they end up operating that in is in second importance to that.
Yeah.
Whilst they're training, yes, the vast majority of their work is NHS. We all know those patients they're treating are getting a private level of time and attention and a second backup, very experienced dentist.
Mm-hmm.
So those patients are actually doing very well. They don't realise, perhaps, how much personal attention they're getting as great value for money for their NHS charge if they pay NHS charges, which 70% of adults do, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, I feel educationally we are protecting the new foundation dentists and the system by being quality-led first. Yes, we're service-led as well, but we're not compromising anything. We're finding out where they need most help and developing that. What happens at the end of foundation training is how attractive is the NHS contract or further training. A lot of them are going for salaried posts in hospital, of course. So they're going to have to think about that. That's more a workforce planning issue, which I don't control. If you ask me, Tony, as a TPD, if you had a magic wand, what's the one big thing you could do qualitatively to improve things? It would be make the foundation training scheme a 2-year scheme. Give everybody time to develop the teaching and then the further training they need to be competent with a level of proficiency when they come out. That'll prepare them, be it for an NHS career, a hospital career, specialist training, teaching DCPs, whatever it is, that would be the best value for money for the country. You know, without being too political or anything about it. That one thing would create a massive buffer to improve what are a lot of separate deficiencies adding up. But will they fund it? And they're crazy not to, because it'd be great value for money. But then you'd need the trainers to do it. And then you'd need to fund them a little bit better. But in the big picture of things, it's not actually, for the quality you're getting, it's not that expensive. It's great value for money. But if you're in the mindset of, well, how much can we trim off the budget every year, every April? You're just going to keep plucking the goose that lays the golden eggs.
Yeah, it's a downward spiral, isn't it? So, Tony, I have learned so much today. And as I said, you've actually changed my perspective on this. And I thank you very much for your time. And
I know it's just flown by. And can I just say, after, shall we say, many decades in dentistry, you never stop learning, and you never stop improving, and you never stop evolving. So, you know, that's a good way to go forward and keep enjoying whatever you do, whether it's dentistry or in your personal lives or to relax or hobbies or anything. Never stop learning. Keep pushing slightly outside your comfort zone, but not too much, and enjoy what you do. That's very important.
Tony, thank you so much, and it's been an absolute pleasure having you here today.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it. Thank you.